What's good, y'all? And welcome back to another preseason preview video. In today's video, we're going over the Detroit Pistons. In case this is your first preseason preview video of mine that you're seeing, basically what I do is go over the offseason, give a little recap there, and then try to look into the future and see what we can expect in this upcoming season. I'm dropping videos on all 30 NBA teams, and I'm almost done, so make sure you check out the channel for the ones that I already uploaded, and then make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the ones coming out going forward. But let's just jump right into it and talk about the Detroit Pistons. Arguably last year they were the most successful team. Obviously you could say no, it was the OKC Thunder because they won the championship, but last year for the Pistons to end up as the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference, going 44-38 after all that they did, I definitely think that they had a super successful season. When it came to the playoffs, they were in a super competitive series with the New York Knicks. They took the Knicks to 6 before they ended up losing in that first round. But like I said, when you look at what the Pistons have been going through, last year was super successful. Before last year, they infamously lost 28 games straight, and then, even looking further back, they're coming off 5 straight years of 25 or less wins, and then, of course, last year, they ended up hitting that breakout year, making the playoffs, and becoming a competitive team. And now, led by Cade Cunningham, we're kind of entering this new era of Detroit Pistons basketball, where they are back being competitive, being scrappy, really going out there and giving it their all, and being a good basketball team for the first time in a while, and I'm really excited for this new era. And I don't think it was a one-and-done season last year. I definitely think that they can still be competitive this year, and when you look at the moves they made this offseason, I do think that the front office kind of reflects that, and they still want to be competitive, and we might as well just get right into it and talk about their offseason moves. Before I talk about the guys that they brought in, I do want to highlight some of the guys they lost this offseason, and I do think the Pistons lost some staple pieces to the rotation last year, so I do want to talk about some of those guys. We'll kind of build our way up in levels of importance, starting off with Simone Fontecchio. He was included in a sign-and trade for Duncan Robinson. We'll talk about Duncan in a little bit, but Simone is headed to the Miami Heat as a part of that sign-and deal. And honestly, I like Simone. I think that he's a pretty good player, but at the end of the day, he wasn't like a super important piece to this Detroit Pistons rotation. When it came to the playoffs, he wasn't a part of their playoff rotation, and he did bring some good three-point shooting, but like I said, for the guy that they traded him for in Duncan Robinson, I don't think they'll be really missing him too much. Now is where we talk about the guys that were actual staples in their playoff rotation that they lost. Starting off with Tim Hardaway Jr., another guy that brought a lot of three-point shooting to this team. He ended up signing a new deal in free agency with the Denver Nuggets. And I really do like what Tim Hardaway Jr. brought to the Pistons last year. He was one of their better three-point shooters as well, and he just can get hot at any moment. He had some real good playoff games too, and all around, just as a veteran for this super young team, I really like what he brought. Unfortunately, like I said, he did sign a new deal with the Denver Nuggets though. And arguably their biggest loss, in my opinion, is Dennis Schroeder. He signed a new contract with the Sacramento Kings. Dennis Schroeder was almost too good for the Pistons because now he was able to play up into a contract that the Pistons weren't able to offer him. The Sacramento Kings just gave him an absolute bag to become their starting point guard. So shout out to Schroeder. He definitely deserves it. But yeah, he kind of played too good for the Pistons to be able to bring him back. He was one of their most important pieces in the playoffs, playing defense against Jalen Brunson, really scrappy. He was knocking the three ball down, being that release valve for a guy like Cade Cunningham when he had so much pressure being the ball handler. Schroeder was able to come in and run the offense a little bit, get some other guys involved, create his own shot. Again, he outplayed his value and played himself into this enormous contract that the Pistons just weren't able to make a competitive offer for. And then last but not least, this one's probably the weirdest and another super important guy that they lost, and that is, of course, Malik Beasley. Malik Beasley was the second best three-point shooter when it comes to just volume and makes last year. He was incredible for the Pistons, a real spark plug off their bench, and he was set up to make a real big bag with the Pistons. He was going to re-sign for, I think it was 3 or 4 years. And then it came out that he was under investigation from the FBI on gambling. It never was super clear on the exact specifics on what he was under investigation for, but from my understanding, it was that maybe he was doing similar things to what Jante Porter did or Terry Rozier, where he was under investigation for selling games and purposely getting his unders. Where things get super weird though was he was cleared by the FBI. They said that he did no wrongdoings, but then he's also now under investigation by the NBA still. And at this point, I mean, again, we'll talk about what the Pistons did for the rest of their moves, bringing in guys, but they don't really have money now to re-sign Malik Beasley, and majority of NBA teams don't really have money to re-sign Malik Beasley. So he kind of gets screwed now. He was going to make like $40 million. Now he's probably going to have to sign a minimum. And that's, of course, assuming the NBA eventually clears him and finds him to do no wrongdoing. Like I said, it is a super weird situation here because he's coming off a career season, was a super important part for the Pistons and their success. And now he's kind of just sitting in free agency right now, and no one's really signing him. I know it was rumored that since there was so much mutual love between Malik Beasley and Detroit, that maybe he still will re-sign on just a super low deal. I don't know if that's going to happen. Again, he's still under investigation. So just all around a weird situation. Hopefully Malik Beasley is able to get his bag though. And although the Pistons did lose some pretty important pieces, I do think the front office did a good job at replacing a lot of that value and that production. So let's just get right into it and talk about the guys they are bringing in. Starting off with Duncan Robinson. Like I mentioned, they did a sign and trade that involved Simone Fontecchio being sent to the Miami Heat in exchange for Duncan Robinson, who signed a new $48 million 3-year deal. So he will be making about $16 million a year. And this is the guy that they brought in to kind of replace some of that three-point production from a Malik Beasley or from a Tim Hardaway Jr. I do like that Duncan Robinson has a little bit more size than those guys, being 6'7". Not that he's like a lockdown defender or anything like that, but having size just does bode well for your defense. But Duncan Robinson as a movement shooter has been one of the best for a few seasons now. He's able to do normal catch and shoot, but also come off those pin downs. And he's just one of the more versatile three-point shooters in the NBA, where he can get it on any part of the arc, whether it's the corners, on the wing, top of the key, from deep, like I said, movement shooting or just to catch and shoot. He's able to pretty much do it all. And like I mentioned, losing a guy like Malik Beasley, who was such a prolific three-point shooter, replacing him with a guy like Duncan Robinson, that's pretty much the best that you can do. And then also to help some of that three-point shooting and shot creation, they did also bring in Caris LeVert. They signed him to a 2-year, $29 million contract, so he'll be making about $14.5 million a year. And I like this pickup too. I feel like Caris LeVert had a real underrated season with the Cavs to start off. Then he did get traded for DeAndre Hunter and got sent to the Atlanta Hawks halfway through. And he did have some real good, efficient production for the Cavs off their bench. And then, like I mentioned, when he came to Atlanta and had that bigger role, the efficiency dropped a little bit, but the production grew, where he was able to give more points per game, more rebounding. His assists dropped a little bit, but he still was creating more for himself, being that shot creator. So when he comes to Detroit, I look for him to kind of find that happy medium where he's able to create for himself a little bit coming off their bench, but also when he's in those lineups with a Cade Cunningham or Jaden Ivey, he's able to take more of that off-ball role and get that efficiency up. They also brought in Javonte Green on a 1-year veteran minimum contract. I really like him as a culture vet. I really think he fits what the Pistons like to do as just a super gritty, defensive-oriented team. Him having some size as a forward/wing, I really like him just coming here for depth and, again, being that veteran presence. And then last but not least, even though it's not technically a new addition, they did re-sign Paul Reed, who was a free agent. He signed a 2-year, $11 million contract, so he'll be making about $5.5 million a year. And now that we recap the offseason for the Pistons, let's take a look at a potential rotation we could be seeing. In their starting lineup, we have Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Asar Thompson, Tobias Harris, and Jalen Duren. And then off the bench, we have Marcus Sasser, Caris LeVert, Duncan Robinson, Ron Holland, and Isaiah Stewart. One of my biggest issues with the Pistons last year was they relied too much on Cade Cunningham and his creation, in my opinion. I really do like Cade as an offensive engine, and I do think that he can be in that role and shoulder that much of a load. But I do think that for the Pistons, if they want to take that next leap, they're going to have to figure out ways to make that easier for Cade, make it so he doesn't have to every single time down the court, run the pick and roll, get to the rim, or kick it out and get that shot open. He doesn't need to create every single shot. And I do think that this year they will be able to help out a little bit more. Like I mentioned last year, I really like what Dennis Schroeder brought, especially in the playoffs, where he was able to be that release valve for Cade Cunningham and allow him to kind of be a little bit more off ball in some situations and just, again, take some of that pressure off of him. And now this season, like I mentioned, they did lose Schroeder to the Sacramento Kings, but they do have Jaden Ivey coming back from injury, and I think that he's going to be a super important piece if he's able to be that creator next to Cade Cunningham, and then in lineups where Cade's on the bench, Jaden Ivey being that main ball handler and creator. I think that is probably the most important aspect of this Pistons team and the biggest X factor. Obviously, Jaden Ivey is coming off of injury, so we don't know 100% what to expect from him, but before he got hurt, he was having a terrific season, so hopefully he's able to look a little bit more like that, if not even better, and if that's the case, then yeah, they'll definitely have the ability to take off that pressure from Cade. And it doesn't only rely on Jaden Ivey. Obviously, they brought in other guys like Caris LeVert. Like I mentioned, when he went to Atlanta, he was getting a little bit more opportunity to create for himself. Hopefully, he's able to bring some of that to Detroit, but also Marcus Sasser, he's able to create his own shot a little bit. I do think that a big part of that is going to go to Jaden Ivey, and that it's going to be mainly his responsibility to have that, release of pressure off of Cade. But I do like that they went out and got a guy like Caris LeVert also to kind of help with that. And although they did lose such important pieces to their three-point shooting like Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr., I do think that they should still have enough three-point shooting. You have Jaden Ivey, who before getting hurt was shooting 40% from three. Then you have Marcus Sasser, who's a good three-point shooter. The additions of Duncan Robinson and Caris LeVert. Tobias Harris had a kind of shaky three-point shooting season last year, but he, throughout his career, has been a at least average three-point shooter. Like, you can't just leave him wide open. Cade Cunningham himself has also taken strides pretty much every year since coming into the league at improving his three-point shooting. You would hope that he continues to grow that. But even if he doesn't, he's able to produce enough without it. It would be great for him to be able to knock down a catch-and-shoot three when, Jaden Ivey has the ball in his hands and, just allow him to get some of those easier buckets. But I do think that the rest of the team around him has ample amount of shooting. And when it comes down to it, I do think that this Pistons team is still going to rely on their defense and their size. Having Cade Cunningham be your point guard at 6'6" definitely helps for your defense. And then when you have athletic freaks of Asar Thompson and Ron Holland, running around the perimeter, Isaiah Stewart locking down the paint coming off your bench. I feel like Isaiah Stewart is one of the most underrated defenders and rim protectors in the NBA. Jalen Duren isn't a defender, but he's a big body and he's athletic, so he knows how to block some shots and just take up space down there in the paint. And then, like I said, their length too, adding a 6'7" Duncan Robinson, a 6'8" Tobias Harris. I really do think that this team is still going to be one of the better defensive teams. And before we move on, I do want to mention some notable reserves. First off, we have Paul Reed. When Isaiah Stewart got hurt in the playoffs, Paul Reed was able to come out and give some pretty productive backup center minutes. He's definitely behind Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren in the depth chart, but if one of those guys goes down with injury, Paul Reed definitely will be the one to step up and, kind of eat up some of those minutes. And then also, they do have Javonte Green, who I mentioned they brought in on a minimum contract this year. I do think that he could be real good as just extra wing depth in case someone gets hurt or, they need a little bit more defense in their lineup. He has that pretty good size while being that defensive-oriented player where I think he could crack the rotation. And now it's time for my ceiling, floor, and expectation for the Detroit Pistons. Starting off with their ceiling, I can see them being as high as the 3 seed in this Eastern Conference. If you guys have watched my preseason preview videos on some of the better teams in the Eastern Conference, you know that I have a pretty clear tier list of the top 2 teams being the Knicks and the Cavs, and then below that you have a few different teams where I would throw the Pistons in there, the Magic, the Hawks, maybe even the Bucks. That's that next tier. So at their ceiling, I do think that the Pistons could be at the top of that tier 2, if you want to say, and being that 3 seed. Like I mentioned, I do think they're going to be a really good defensive team, and since they're so young, you never really know how much internal development we're going to see from a Cade Cunningham or a Jaden Ivey, a Sar Thompson, Ron Holland, Jalen Duren. You know, they have so many young pieces that they could blossom into, you know, some crazy different thing that we haven't seen before, and in that case, you know, they could be one of the better teams and end up as this 3 seed. And last year, they were a tough first round exit, and I do think that they can build upon that, make it to the second round. But when you come to talk about how young they are, how inexperienced they are, and then looking at some of the other teams in the Eastern Conference, I don't know if they would be able to make it past that second round. So at their ceiling, I think they're a second round exit. At their floor, I have them as low as the 6th seed. I do think that they are definitely above a play-in level team. Like I mentioned, there's kind of that top tier, then that second tier is like 3 through 6. So at their floor, they would be at the bottom of that, but still well above the play-in tournament. And last year, they were the 6th seed and a first round exit. At their floor, I do think that they could be a 6th seed again and a first round exit again. I don't think that that would be a bad season by any stretch, though. Like I mentioned, before last year, they went 5 years straight of winning 25 or less games. A lot of the times, it was 20 or less games. So still, if you make the playoffs again, that is still progress that shows that you're being a better team year in and year out than what you were. So, you know, even if it's not a better seeding and a further playoff push, I still think that it could be a successful season for the Pistons. But when you talk about my expectations, I expect them to be a little bit better than last year, probably around that 5th seed. You know, I do think that they are going to be one of the better teams in this weaker Eastern Conference. I still think, though, that they are relatively young, and when you compare them to some of these other teams that have a little bit more playoff experience, I do think that it could be tough for them to make it out of the first round, especially if they are one of the lower seeds in the first round. So for that reason, I do expect them to be a tough first round exit again. What do you guys think, though? Let me know in the comments below where you think the Pistons are going to end in this year's standings, and how far will they make it in the postseason. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave it a like, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. In the description, there's links to all my social media, so make sure you follow me on all those to keep up to date with me. Catch y'all.